Hello, everyone. My name is Glenn, and my topic is over managing discussion in a Japanese classroom. My target class is at the university level, but I think this can be transferred to the high school or junior high school levels as well. I will be talking about three main points. The first is about the Japanese classroom and the students, along with the JET program. Then I will cover some things to be aware of in the classroom and what you can do to create good discussion and speaking practice. Last, I will cover the sources that I found and used throughout my presentation. In Japan, you need to remember that harmony is extremely important, and there are two phrases that emphasize this. The first one is that silence is golden, and the second one is the nail that sticks up gets hammered. This second phrase really emphasizes conformity. Everyone should try to act, dress, and think the same. So this means it's very impolite to disagree or to argue with someone, especially with strangers and in public. Also, the education system in Japan is primarily focused on entrance exams. Each school level has an entrance exam, and each entrance exam is different from each other. So a lot of the material that students will cover in their current classroom is material that either the teacher or the school thinks will be necessary to pass the next entrance exam. In Japan, there is a program called the JET program, or the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program. This program brings in young people from other countries to serve as ALTs, or alternative language teachers. So inside of the English classroom, there are two teachers, the ALT and the Japanese English teacher. When this program first started, ALTs were usually part-time, and the target was to have one ALT per school. That has changed. Now, ALTs are usually full-time, and the target is to have two ALTs per school. However, a lot of schools still don't have an ALT, especially in poor and rural areas. In schools that do have an ALT, there can be a lot of conflict between the ALT and the Japanese English teacher, or with the ALT and the school. Oftentimes, these problems will go unresolved. Another problem for ALTs is that while they do get some initial training, there is not enough adequate training or development throughout their career. This program has a 3-year limit, so there are also no veteran ALTs. Inside of the classroom, the primary focus of the activities is either on reading, writing, listening, or translating. There is a lot of dedicated translating practice, where the teacher will tell the students to open their textbook and translate a passage from Japanese to English or from English to Japanese. This means that there is no dedicated speaking time inside of the classroom. Another problem that is spread out to every subject is that the teachers talk at the students. The teacher tells the students what to do and how to do it, and the students react to that. This means that the students are very teacher dependent in every area. Something to remember is that Japanese students will almost always agree. So they are very hesitant to share their personal ideas or thoughts. Also, creative or critical thinking is a skill that is often not practiced. In Japan, there are no taboo topics like politics or religion might be in other countries. However, it's important to remember not to let the strongest student dictate the class. If a student has the strongest English ability or knows the most, if that student gives an opinion first, again, all the other students will simply agree. So it's important to try and get the opinions of the other students first in most of your classes. Also, don't leave any details up to the students. In some countries, you can allow the students to dictate the flow and subject of a discussion, but that's not usually possible in Japan. Making good habits is extremely important. Something I like to do for my classes is to tell my students that Japanese in class gets marks. So I have my student's name on a board, and each time I hear a Japanese word, I put a mark under their name. However, it's up to the teacher to decide what does or doesn't get marks. For example, I don't give marks for reactive or thinking words. And if a student can give me a really good question or sentence, I will erase a mark if they have one. At the end of class, if a student has a mark, they have to do a little something extra for me. Like tell me a short story, about 4 to 5 sentences long. Also, do not accept one word or short sentence answers. I always preach to my students to stop before they give an answer and think about the WH questions. If they did something, why did they do it? Where did they do it? With who and where did they do it? I also have a question minimum in my classroom. Each student must ask at least 3 questions to me or the other students. Again, if they don't, they have to do something extra again. Some things that I like to do inside of the classroom are activities like role play or interviews. This allows the student to adopt a character in a situation and say things they think that character would say instead of themselves, like a customer and a waiter in a restaurant, or a hotel clerk and a tourist. For group discussions, I like to give my students an opinion and force that student to come up with ideas or thoughts based on what opinion I gave them. Depending on the level of the student, I sometimes like to give outrageous or silly opinions, or have students write down thoughts and ideas on a piece of paper and exchange those. This allows students to separate themselves and their opinions from what they're saying. I also like to have my students try some problem solving. I will present a problem to the class, and each of them has to solve it either individually or with a group. If a group is strong enough, I will ask each group or student to give a different solution that has not been presented yet. Games are also really good. Board games, card games, or games like charades and 20 questions are all really good, especially for beginning students. One game that I really like is called Cat and Chocolate. A student has to draw a situation card, like you missed your train going to Tokyo and are now in Osaka. And that student has to try and resolve that situation using certain item cards that they draw. It might be something like a baseball bat, a water bottle, and your grandmother. Each situation is different and requires a different amount of item cards to be used. I also like to have my students explain something to me, whether it's their favorite sport, movie, or TV show. Again, they are not necessarily giving me an opinion, just explaining something to me. But it's important to remember to absolutely do not rely on free talk. During my research, I found 3 really great sources. The first one is from Mitchell Fryer and Peter Roger. They talk about the study abroad experiences of Japanese ELLs. It was something that I have personally noticed, but it was interesting to see the personalities of the students they followed and how they changed from before they studied abroad and after. The students who studied abroad were much more confident in themselves and much more outspoken about their opinions and some of the complaints they had about the Japanese education system. The next one is from Yuko Awai, and she talks about the challenges facing Japanese English teachers. She mainly focuses on the problems that ALTs face in the classroom and some of the solutions they can try. I'm not an ALT, nor have I ever been one. But a lot of the problems that she talks about, even though this paper is a little dated, are problems that are still very, very relevant. And I have heard multiple times from the ALTs that I have met over my time here in Japan. Last is from Yoshiyuki Nakata about the intrinsic motivation in the EFL school context. Since students are forced to study English from a very young age, it's very common to have students be completely unmotivated by the time they come to learn from you for a variety of reasons. The last thing I would like to talk about is about some of my own opinions. The last statistic that I saw said Japan was still over 98% Japanese, which means opportunities to speak English outside of the classroom are extremely rare, and trying to create an ideal environment inside of the classroom is very difficult. I have often heard the Japanese say they are very negative thinkers, and oftentimes can't express themselves or their opinions even in Japanese. I would like to thank everyone for watching, and I hope you learned something. Good luck with the rest of the semester and the future.